Hey everyone, it's Carly Hall, and today we are going to convert this Epson EcoTank into a sublimation printer. I do have a video on this, and I filmed that about a year ago, so I've learned a lot in the year that I've been working with sublimation. So if you want to see that video, I'll link it in the video description. But in this video, I'll share some tips and tricks that I've learned along the way, and we are also going to try out this ink from Hiipoo. It is formulated for sublimation, so the first thing, and I'll repeat this several times in the video, if you purchase an Epson EcoTank, the one thing that you won't want to do if you're using it for sublimation is fill it with the ink that it comes with. You will want to fill it with actual sublimation ink. So I'm going to walk you through the setup, and then we will complete a project together. All right, let's get started. Here's a look at the bottles that come with your printer. We will not be using these today, but I definitely don't recommend tossing them. This ink is expensive, so if you have another printer that you can use these with, just a regular inkjet printer. I have an Epson EcoTank, so I like to fill up my tanks and then use the empty bottles, which I'll show you today. But if you don't have a printer that you can use them with, I know a lot of people sell them on Facebook Marketplace because they are expensive, and you definitely don't want to waste the ink. And we're going to talk about the special bottles and where you can get those too. So again, we're not using this ink today. Like I said, I'll repeat that several times in this video because it breaks my heart when you guys finally get your hands on an Epson EcoTank and then accidentally fill it up with the ink and then have to drain it out. So we will not be using these. You can keep them sealed up so that you don't accidentally fill up your printer, but we are not using these today. You'll notice all of this blue tape. You'll just start peeling this off. Once you've removed all the tape off the scanner unit, if you have a scanner on your printer, you'll open it up and remove these two little guys. And then we're going to open up the top. Inside the top of the printer, it's a little bit difficult to see, but you'll see more blue tape. So go ahead and peel that away in addition to this foam block. So you'll want to remove that out again if your printer has this scanner unit on top. Remove any of the foam packaging. And then just pay attention to your unboxing instructions. So I'm just following these instructions. There's some warnings about not touching the white cable or the ink tubes. So just make sure that you're following along with those instructions to remove all of the blue tape. Once you have all your packaging removed, it's time to install our sublimation ink. So we're going to fill up these reservoirs with sublimation ink. So for this model, you're going to open up the lid, and this little guy will prop it open, and then you can open up the cover to access the inks. In my other printer, you can just open that cover and access the inks. Now, I was so excited to show you how to recycle the old bottles. So say you had another Epson EcoTank and you had extra bottles, you can use a pair of pliers and take off the lid. It's a little bit difficult, but you can definitely do it. I just kind of forced my way around them and used pliers to get that open, and then you can fill up these bottles with sublimation ink. I'm really glad that I didn't fill these up yet because these bottles are Epson 522 bottles compatible with my Epson EcoTank 4700. I know that's a lot of numbers, but all you need to know is that this bottle is actually different than the bottle that came with my new printer. So this is a 502 bottle. And that's important to note because there are kind of like keys on the top of these lids. Let me show you. So there's a different pattern, and those keys lock in with the top of the ink reservoir so that they can sit down into the ink and fill it up. So I was planning on using these and showing you how smart I am to fill these up with sublimation ink and then use these bottles. That's not going to work today because my bottles from my Epson EcoTank 4700 are different from these bottles. So if you have other bottles that you can store this ink in, it just pains me to toss this ink, so I'm not going to do that. But you can pour this ink out and save it, and then you reuse these bottles so that it makes it a little bit easier. And I also know that Hiipoo ink sells their ink in compatible bottles, but it's important to note that there are different bottles for different Epson EcoTanks, which I was not aware of. So make sure to pay attention to the type of ink that your Epson EcoTank takes when you're ordering sublimation compatible bottles. So we're going to do this the old school way and fill it up with some syringes. So here we have our our ink. And in the package, you have 4 different syringes with needles and gloves so that we can fill up all the tanks. You'll want to protect your workspace a little bit. It is messy, so I'm going to grab some paper towel and we will get started. Starting with the black, we are going to open the top of the ink and our ink packaging. So we'll just pop the needle onto the top of the syringe. So you can see that there's a long, skinny needle. There you go. So the needle goes on the end of the syringe, and then you'll have one for each color. Okay, so I want to make sure you can see that, but I have my bottle flipped over, and that's a little bit easier. I'm just pouring it, or pulling rather, and then I'm going to break that seal so that the ink stays in there. And then we'll just fill this guy up. Again, making sure to go really slow so there's no air bubbles. And slowly but surely, the ink inside the Eco tank is filling up. I'm not sure if you can see that with my hand blocking there. But I will time lapse this and you can see it fill up. So the ink looks pretty full on cyan, magenta, and yellow, but it will actually drop quite a bit when we turn it on and do our first print. So I do have a little bit of extra of these 3 colors, so don't throw away your needles yet. You may need to fill them up just a little bit more after we do our first print. So we're going to close the cover and then close the entire unit and power on the printer. Even with my gloves, I did get a little bit of ink on my hands, so make sure that you're careful and you cover your workspace. So we'll plug this in and go through the setup process. So we'll use this power cord, plug this into the back, and then plug that into an outlet. To start the setup process, we're going to raise this control panel here and power on your printer. You'll go through the setup flow and set your language, your country, and if you're in daylight savings time or not, choose a date format, all that good stuff. So I'm just going to run through that kind of quickly. So now on my screen, I have a processing screen. I'm not sure if you can see that, but it's processing. And then we'll just continue to follow the setup instructions. So now there is a note that says, see the start here bundled with the printer or on the website to complete the initialization. This will look a little bit different with each model, but my instructions say hold the question mark button for 5 seconds. So it just gives us a note about not squeezing the ink bottles and that you make sure the color matches the ink bottle in the ink tank. We already did that. And now we are going to start the initialization. So this is kind of where the ink will filter through our printer and fill up everything inside the actual printer. So we're going to click done. And then for the next 10 minutes, it will initialize. So obviously I will skip through this part, but it will take about 10 minutes to initialize and set up everything on your printer. So the initialization is complete, and you can see that the ink levels have dropped a little bit, and I think they'll drop a little bit more after our first print. So we'll move on to the adjustment, and we are going to adjust and perform a print head nozzle check and all that fun stuff. So I think we need to load some paper. Yep, so we're gonna load some paper and git check-in. So it's asking to load letter paper. I think you can either load it in the bottom tray, I missed some tape here, or the rear feeder tray. I'm just going to stick it in the bottom tray. So we'll open up these guides to fit a letter size piece of paper and throw some paper in here. And then we'll click print. So on the screen, it says that we want to make sure that there's no broken lines, and we'll select the closer result. So the black lines look good. The colored lines, not so much. So I am going to click the X because I want to run it again. And we'll click the X and we'll run the print head cleaning, and then it will reprint again. So here is test number 2. Again, the black lines look really good and we're almost clear on the red and the blue. It would probably be fine to get away with this now, but we are going to run one more time just because I want to make sure that it is completely closed on all those lines. And the other thing I want to note, this paper is just regular copy paper. Don't waste your sublimation paper on this. I mean, I typically use copy paper for my sublimation projects anyway, but this is copy paper for these tests. So I'm going to run one more time and then we should be good to go. So it's not perfect yet. I could go through and do it one more time, but I'm going to continue the setup. And you can always go back and do this test again and make sure that the lines are connected. So we're going to continue on and set up the rest of the printer. So the next one is align print position to fix misalignment and banding. So we'll go ahead and do that. And then it says that we need 4 sheets of paper. I think I only have 1 left, so let me add some more paper. So these tests will ask you some questions. You'll want to select the patterns that best match that are on the screen. So for example, on the number 1 column, which one looks the best? And then you just pick whichever one looks the best. So you'll just walk through these tests. I won't waste your time showing you all of them, but you can kind of get the point of what we're doing, and then we'll set it up to connect to our computer next. To install the software, if you have a computer that has a disk drive, you can insert the installation software disk. I'm using a Mac, so mine doesn't have a disk drive. So I went to www.epson.com/support and then /my model number. I'll put a link in the video description, and then you can just type in your model number. So we're going to set this up. It will detect the operating system that we have, and then it will recommend some drivers and all the different things that we need. So depending on what you want to install, the utilities will include things like a scanner, all this different stuff like this. If you don't want any of that and you just want the driver, then you can just install the driver. So I'm just going to install what they recommend here. I'll click this big download button and it will start downloading. You can see down here in the corner. We'll click on that to open it. And you can see it's opening here. We'll double click on this. So you just want to walk through the installer instructions and continue on through that whole process. Again, you can choose what you want to install on your computer. If you don't need the scanner or you don't need the user's guide, you don't have to install everything. So I don't need this. And I think I already have this installed, but we'll keep it anyway. All right, so let's click Start to begin the printer setup, and then it'll walk us through the step-by-step. So this is what I was talking about when I was saying the ink is going to fill up your printer. And I think it already went through this process, but we're going to confirm that our ink is charged. So it says for the first time, you need to fill the ink tanks and start the ink charging process, as the Start Here poster explained. So I think we did that. So we're going to click to confirm. All right, we are going to set up a direct USB connection. And I'm just going to use my Cricut USB cord. So the same cord I use to connect my computer to my Cricut. So I'm going to use that. We're going to add the printer, continue on. We want to use the Epson ET15000 series. And I'm going to call it my wide format sublimation printer and click add. Okay, so now we can print our test page. So here is our test page and you can see that it printed out. Again, remember the colors are a lot lighter than what they will transfer. So now we can print out a project and transfer it onto a blank. I know this video is getting long, so we will wrap this up really soon. All right, so I've installed all of the drivers onto my computer. So now my printer is installed. And I wanted to talk about the ink really quickly because I thought that the Hiipoo ink, this is the ink that I used here, I thought it came in the Epson bottles, and it looks like this is actually regular ink. So I will link to the Sublimation ink right here in the video description. I'll also put it on my Sublimation shop list in my Amazon store. But don't buy these ones. These are just regular inkjet inks. But I imagine in the future, Hiipoo will come out with ink in these bottles. So you'll just want to pay attention to those numbers that I was talking about, since I didn't realize that they were just different numbers. So 522 and 502, but you'll just look at what printer you have and purchase the ones that are compatible with your printer. But again, right now, the only Sublimation ink is this one with the syringes. So make sure to pay attention to the listing so you're not putting in regular Inkjet ink. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about is how to actually design a print to work with your printer. This was just going to be a setup video, but I feel like if I left you here, then people that are just being introduced to sublimation would be really confused about what was going on. So we're going to walk through a quick little test project and kind of go over the basics just a bit. If you don't have a preferred design program that you already use to print your designs for other projects, I recommend using the free version of Silhouette Studio. It's completely free. I have Business Edition, which is beneficial with my Cricut, but I will actually show you this view in the standard edition so you know that you can actually use the free version. So this is the free version now, and I have pulled in an image. This image is actually from the Silhouette Design Store. So you can find different images and play with the colors, or you can download images from the internet. Depending on if you're selling them, just make sure you're paying attention to copyrights and trademarks and all that good stuff. So I found this image and I purchased it and then changed the colors up, and I'm going to print it out using my new Sublimation printer, and then we'll transfer it onto a blank. So again, you'll want to choose the colors that you actually want to print because we're printing them, not cutting them out. And just resize your image to fit on whatever blank you're using. So my image is about 5 by 4. And I can duplicate this so I could take advantage of the entire piece of paper if I wanted to print multiple, depending on what you want to do. In Silhouette Studio, you'll want to make sure that your page setup matches the material that you're printing on. So on the very right, you'll click on this page setup here. And then you don't need to pay attention to the machine or the cutting mat size, just the media size. And I'm using a piece of letter paper. I'm going to use copy paper in this demonstration. I have an entire YouTube video on comparing sublimation paper and copy paper. And if you've been around for a while, you know that I am a very frugal crafter. So if I can use copy paper, especially for a test, I'm definitely going to use copy paper. But if you want to invest in sublimation paper, it does work as well, if not better. Some people say it works better, but I can't tell a difference. So I use copy paper since I am pretty cheap. So we're going to choose a letter size piece of paper. And the orientation will flip depending on your sizes here. So if I wanted it to be the other way, I could type in my dimensions. So that's 8.5 by 11 vertically as opposed to horizontally. Or I can choose the horizontal and vertical orientation down here. You also have some other options to show the print border. So you can see that I don't want to print within these edges. So lots of fun things just to kind of play around with and learn in Silhouette Studio. Once you're happy with your design, I typically center my design, and I'll show you why I do that when it prints out. And then the last thing you want to do for sublimation is you need to mirror your image. You're going to be placing your image down onto your project blank. So to mirror your image, come up to the top, click Object, and then Mirror and flip horizontally. There's also an option to flip on the print settings, but I like to do it on this page so I just don't forget and I don't end up printing out all these things that I can't use. Once you're satisfied with your designs and your colors and your sizing, you're going to print this out, and you can literally print out anything. You can also print out photos. I made some mugs. I'll link to the tutorials that I've done in the past on sublimation so you can get a good idea of the projects you can make. So we'll click File and then Print. And then we are going to make sure that our printer settings are correct. So when you click Print, it'll actually open up your printer settings. These settings here are going to show you what they're formatted for. So if your printer isn't selected, you'll want to make sure you select your new printer and the size that you're using. And then it will prompt you on the next screen. If you don't do that, it's okay. You can change them here too. So when you click Print, again, it's not actually going to print. It's going to pull up this dialog box where we can choose some additional settings. So we're using our new wide format sublimation printer. If you didn't change the name, it'll just be Epson and the type of printer that you just set up. And then I'm not going to use the default settings. I'm going to come down here and change my printer settings down here. So we have print settings here, and I like to change my paper type to premium presentation paper matte. And the paper types might be a little bit different depending on your printer, but I usually try to find one that's a photo paper that's matte. That's going to lay down the most ink and get the best coverage. So that's what I've always done in the last year, and it's worked really well for me. So presentation paper matte works well, premium presentation paper matte, really just anything that's a premium matte paper is great, or a photo matte paper. And then I change my quality to best quality. So that will just make sure that my ink is really solid and will provide the best transfer. Like I mentioned, you do have the mirror image option here, but I like to change it beforehand, so I'm going to leave that. For the paper source, since I'm using regular copy paper, I'm going to leave the paper cassette, but you could also have the paper tray in the back if you want to load just a single sheet of sublimation paper in there or other type of paper that you're using. Everything else, the color options, I'm doing the, let's see, oh, you have manual settings here, so you could do advanced options if you wanted, or you could just leave those off. So I'm not going to have any type of color adjustments. And I think that is everything else. Yep. So everything else looks good. And now I'm ready to print. So I'll just go ahead and click print. And now Silhouette will actually send the job to my printer. So my print is done, and I wanted to show you that my ink levels do look significantly lower. And like I mentioned, that was the charging process, but I still have ink that I can fill those up with. So I left a little bit of room, those dropped, and then I can fill those back up to the top. I have ink left for magenta, cyan, and yellow. My black one is a larger reservoir, so of course I did use all of the black there, but I wanted to call that out. For my print, you'll see that it looks a lot lighter than what it's going to transfer, but the colors are very similar to what you see on screen. They're just not as bright. So it's a little bit dull, and that's exactly what you'll expect. Again, this is just regular copy paper, and I think it works great. But you can see the quality of the ink being laid down. It's very consistent. There's no gaps. Everything looks really good for a first trial print. So now we'll transfer this onto the project blank. So the reason that I centered my design is so that I can tear it. One of the tips that I've learned over the last year is that if you press your image with these solid corners or edges, you might get some press marks. So what I've learned to do in the last year is that you just kind of tear your paper, and you just want to avoid your image and tear around the edges so that your edge is not visible. So probably do a better job than I'm doing, but I'm trying to keep my head out of the shot here. So you'll just go around all four edges, making sure there's no blunt edges. So our image is ready. Now we are going to talk about what we need to actually transfer. So I'm using a Cricut Easy Press just because it's tiny, but you can also use a heat press. I do not recommend an iron. An iron is not hot enough and does not have even enough heating capability. So we're using our Cricut Easy Press at 400 degrees for 60 seconds. You'll also want an Easy Press mat if you're using an Easy Press. If you have a heat press, you don't need a mat. To prep your area, I have one sheet of butcher paper. That's going to protect my Easy Press mat. And then you'll want to use polyester fabric. So this is a 95% polyester scrap of fabric. If you're using a blend, I would recommend something that's over 80% and light colors. These inks are translucent, so you can see through them. So you can't press onto a dark color because the ink would kind of work like watercolor. If you had a black piece of paper and then you're trying to watercolor over it, you're not going to see the colors as vibrantly as you probably would like. So just pay attention to the colors that you're pressing on. Light colors work great, light grays, light blues, light pinks, light yellows. Just make sure that your colors are not the same that you're pressing onto them. So I have another video on pressing on a light blue onesie that I will put in the video description. So again, polyester blanks, and any sublimation blank. So if you are searching the internet and you're looking for blanks that are compatible, just make sure that they are sublimation blanks, either mugs, you'll need a mug press, keychains, coasters. There's lots of good stuff out there. I'll link you to a couple of good options. If you're doing a t-shirt, you will want to lint roll your surface. So we'll kind of move through this quickly since this is just a test, but I like to lint roll the front of my shirt and the back of my shirt, or the inside, if it's an actual t-shirt. That way there's no lint on my project blank. Lint is kind of difficult because the ink will turn into a gas and will actually stick to those lint particles. So you'll want to make sure that your surface is nice and clean. I'm going to turn this way. Then you'll take your image. Whoop, I'm getting ahead of myself. First, you'll want to preheat. So preheating isn't actually to make your project hot. It's to take any moisture out of it. So I'm just going to place my Easy Press over it for about 10 to 15 seconds. And that will just suck out any moisture. Moisture is the enemy of sublimation. So you just want to make sure that your blank is completely moisture free. And you'll only do this with your fabric blanks. You don't need to do that for your coaster blanks or your ceramic blanks that are coated with sublimation coating. So now my blank is ready to go, and I am going to place my image on top. You don't want to place it when it's burning hot because you don't want it to start to transfer. So I just like to give it a couple of seconds to drop in temperature. And then we're going to take our blank, or our image rather, we're going to tape it on. This step is optional, but I like heat resistant tape because I just feel like it gives me peace of mind that it's not going to slip around. So I'm using the Cricut brand heat resistant tape, and it just fits in a standard tape dispenser. Again, I'll link to everything, but this is available on Amazon, so really easy to get. The butcher paper that I'm using is true butcher paper, so it's uncoated on both sides, which is really important. Parchment paper, you don't want to use. You want to stay away from parchment or freezer or wax paper because in parchment paper, there's a silicone infused. In wax paper, there's a wax. And in freezer paper, there's a wax. So butcher paper works really well because it will absorb the moisture, as well as copy paper. So if you don't have butcher paper, you can use copy paper. Since I'm not using sublimation paper, it's not very thick, so I'm going to use 2 sheets of butcher paper to cover up my image, which makes it a little bit difficult to see through where your image is. So you kind of have to do a mental note of where your design is. And then when you place your Easy Press, you'll just want to make sure that it's fully covered. So these papers will protect your press from getting any ink blowout onto it. So I'll show you these after we transfer it. So again, I kind of just remembering where my image is, and then I'll just kind of peek under to make sure it's covered up. Hopefully it is. And then when I turn on my timer, I'm just placing 1 hand of pressure on my Easy Press. You do not need to use a lot of pressure, especially for this little guy. Just 1 hand to stabilize it, and you'll want to stay really steady and not move around so it's just completely stable. If you're using the larger presses, 2 hands of pressure is fine. You'll just want to put your body weight on it. You don't need to strain or anything. Just kind of let your hand set on there. And then you might notice the temperature dropped. It will come back up. Just wait until the timer beeps completely before you pull it off. So my recommended settings are usually 400 degrees around 60 seconds, but play around with your settings. If you decide that you want to go longer, you can go longer. It really just depends on your personal preference, but these are the settings that I've been using for the last year, and I've really liked them. Once the timer beeps, you'll just hold down your butcher paper and then lift straight up. And you'll see that the butcher paper kind of has a burnt mark on it, and a little bit of ink even went through to the second sheet. You can barely see it, but that would have gotten on my press if I didn't have 2 sheets. And then you can see on this one, a lot more ink got onto that back one. So you don't want to reuse these. And then you don't want to dive in and grab this right away. You can see a little blue lint dot right there. That's what happens if you have lint, and I'll show you that closer. But those are the little dots that you'll get if you don't lint roll your project blank. So just pay attention to that when you're actually doing a real project. Since this is a test, it's not a huge deal. Once it's cool enough to touch, you can just gently peel off your design. And there's a little bit of ink left on here. That's okay. If you wanted to do longer, you could, but I think the colors turned out super bright and vivid, so I'm happy with the result, and it looks good to me. So let me bring this to you a little bit closer so you can see. So here's the design. I'm not sure if you can see those little blue lint dots, but that's the important part of lint rolling, so you'll want to make sure to get those all off. But you can see that the ink transferred so much brighter than what it printed, and it's really, really super easy to make projects. So you're not worrying about cutting out images and picking the colors, and you can choose whatever colors you want and then transfer these. And you can reuse this bottom sheet of butcher paper because no ink transferred onto that, so you can reuse that over and over for your projects. You'll just want to pay attention to those top sheets of butcher paper in case they get any ink on them. But overall, sublimation conversion of an Epson EcoTank is so easy. I'm really excited about the quality of this ink. You can see that it's really clear, not blurry at all, and really consistent coverage across the entire image. So I'm excited to play around with this printer and do some comparisons with the other ink that I've had and that I've been using for the last year. So I know this ended up being a longer tutorial and there was a lot of information thrown at you. So if you have questions, first check out the description in the video because I will put a link to all the products used and my Amazon store so you can see everything right in one place. But if there are questions that weren't answered in there, definitely drop those in the comments, or if there are tutorials that you want to see in the future, I'm happy to show you more tutorials on sublimation as well. If you found this video helpful, it definitely helps my channel to give it a like, and if you want to see more tutorials about crafting, Cricut, Glowforge, sublimation, definitely subscribe to my channel because I post a video weekly and I would love for you to be here. So check those out and hopefully you learn something new while you're here. All right, I'll see you in the next video.